In After Effects, as with other software, images are made up of small rectangular picture elements known as pixels. Let's zoom in just to look at some pixels here. I'll use the mouse scroll wheel to zoom in on this image. And here we can see these small squares that make up the image. Of course, we can't see these small squares when zoomed far out, and the image just appears to be a smooth image. Notice that these pixels are square, but not all pixels are square. Some are rectangles that have sides where the height and the width are not the same length. The ratio of the width of a pixel to its height is called the pixel aspect ratio. In the case of a square, that ratio is 1.0. But it's possible to have pixel aspect ratio of 2.0 or 0.91 or many other numbers. Let's zoom back out. You need to think about pixel aspect ratio in a few places in After Effects. One, you need to be able to tell After Effects how to interpret footage items, because when After Effects sees a pixel, it doesn't know whether it's square or non-square rectangle in many cases. You also need to consider when you're outputting what pixel aspect ratio to output for. And related to that, you need to know what composition settings to use. So let's look at each of these in turn. If I select this footage item here in the project panel, we can see that its pixel aspect ratio is 1.00. Whereas if we select this item, we can see that its pixel aspect ratio is interpreted as 2.00. This future section final is the source for the image that we're seeing on screen right now, and it looks fine and not distorted at all. So we don't have anything that we need to do there. But if we go to the beginning of the composition, we can see that this image, which is based on this footage item, is looking distorted horizontally. It's stretched. Well, we see here that After Effects thinks that the pixel aspect ratio is 2.0, but clearly that's not right. So let's correct this. Right-click or Control-click on macOS on the footage item and go to Interpret Footage, Main, and choose Square Pixels. And there, that image doesn't look distorted at all. So I'll hit Enter, and then drag the current time indicator back and forth to really look at this image. And that looks undistorted and natural. So really, 1.0 seems to be the correct pixel aspect ratio for this footage item. Many file types, such as QuickTime and AVI, include information in them that tells After Effects what the pixel aspect ratio for the movie contained within them is. But that's not always the case, so After Effects has to guess. In some cases, if an image has a specific set of image dimensions, After Effects can recognize those specific dimensions as being for a common format, and it can use that to make a guess about pixel aspect ratio. But in many cases, you'll have to simply tell it manually, as we just did here. We can see that our composition has composition settings that define a pixel aspect ratio of square pixels. We could change this if we needed to output this composition to other formats that did not use square pixels, but a better way is to cancel and to nest our master composition inside of another composition, as we've done here. If we open anamorphic output, we can see that anamorphic output contains just our master composition, which is square pixels, but in anamorphic output, the composition settings define a 2:1 pixel aspect ratio. So when we send this composition, the anamorphic output composition, out through the render queue, it will create an output file that has a 2:1 pixel aspect ratio. Note, as we're previewing this, because After Effects defaults to showing us square pixels in the composition panel, things look distorted. But we can correct to show us pixels as drawn from the composition settings by clicking the Toggle Pixel Aspect Ratio Correction button. And here, things look fine. That's something to keep in mind. If you're working with a composition that uses non-square pixels, in order to see things at their correct proportions, use the Toggle Pixel Aspect Ratio Correction button. So, as long as you pay attention to your footage interpretation settings, make sure that you're interpreting footage correctly, and you're paying attention to your composition settings to make sure that you're setting the pixel aspect ratio that's appropriate for your output type, you shouldn't really have to worry too much more about pixel aspect ratios.